The Tollkeeper. I should have stayed on the highway. That's the thought that keeps looping through my head. If I hadn't taken that shortcut, if I hadn't tried to save time, I wouldn't be here, writing this, wondering if I'll make it through the night. It started 2 nights ago. My girlfriend Erin and I were driving back from a late-night party in a town 3 hours away. The party had gone later than we planned, and by the time we left, the roads were nearly empty. Erin dozed in the passenger seat while I focused on the winding stretches of asphalt. About an hour into the drive, the GPS suggested an alternate route. A shortcut that cut through some back roads. It would shave off 20 minutes, and I was exhausted, so I took it. The moment I turned onto that narrow, unlit road, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed heavier, the trees lining the road gnarled and looming. Erin stirred, blinking at the darkness around us. "Where are we?" she asked groggily. "Shortcut," I said, trying to sound casual. The road twisted and turned, narrowing with each mile. The trees seemed to lean closer, their skeletal branches almost touching the car. After a while, Erin sat up, her discomfort palpable. "I don't like this," she said. "It feels wrong." I didn't respond, but I couldn't deny the growing unease gnawing at me. And then we saw it. A small wooden shack sat at the side of the road, illuminated by a single flickering lantern. A sign next to it read, "Toll Road, stop and pay." I frowned. "A toll road? Out here?" Erin shook her head. "That doesn't make any sense." There was no barrier, no gate, nothing to enforce the toll. I considered driving past it, but a figure emerged from the shack before I could decide. The man, if you could call him that, was tall and impossibly thin. His limbs elongated in a way that didn't seem natural. He wore a tattered black coat, and his face was obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. "Stop," Erin whispered, her voice trembling. Against my better judgment, I rolled down the window as we pulled up beside him. "Good evening," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "Toll is due." "How much?" I asked, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. The man tilted his head, his face still hidden. "Payment isn't money. Payment is a piece of you." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "A memory," he clarified, his tone patient, like he'd explained this 1,000 times before. "One that matters to you. Give it to me and you may pass." I stared at him, unsure if I was dealing with a lunatic or something far worse. "Let's just go," Erin urged, her hand clutching my arm. I nodded, putting the car in gear, but the man stepped in front of the vehicle with unnerving speed. "You must pay," he said, his voice sharper now. Something in his tone froze me in place. My hands trembled on the wheel as Erin begged me to drive, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. The man leaned closer to my window, and for the first time, I saw his eyes, black, bottomless pits that seemed to suck in all the light around them. "Give me your payment," he repeated. I don't understand," I stammered. "Think of a memory," he said, his voice softening. "Something important, something you treasure. Give it to me, and I'll let you pass." My mind raced. I thought of the night Erin and I met, of my parents, of my childhood dog, all the moments that defined me. The idea of losing one of them was unbearable. "I can't," I whispered. The man straightened, his shadow stretching unnaturally long under the lantern's light. "Then you stay," he said. And just like that, the car engine sputtered and died. Panic surged through me as I turned the key, desperate to restart the car. Nothing. Not even a click. Erin was crying now, her voice rising in hysteria. "Please, just let us go. We'll turn around." The man ignored her, his attention fixed solely on me. "Choose," he said. I clenched my fists, tears of frustration and fear stinging my eyes. Finally, I thought of a memory, small, insignificant compared to the others. My 10th birthday, when my dad taught me how to ride a bike. "Take it," I said through gritted teeth. The man's lips curved into a chilling smile. He reached out, his bony hand brushing against my temple. The moment he touched me, a cold, searing pain shot through my head, and the memory vanished. It wasn't just forgotten, it was erased. The man stepped back, tipping his hat. "You may pass." The car roared to life as if nothing had happened. I didn't hesitate, slamming on the gas and speeding down the road. Erin sobbed quietly beside me, and I tried to focus on the road ahead. But the road didn't end. No matter how far we drove, we never seemed to leave the forest. The same twisted trees lined the road, and the same sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. It was impossible to tell. We didn't see another car, another house, or even a break in the trees. And then, the shack appeared again. The man was waiting. "You lied!" I shouted, slamming on the brakes. "You said we could pass." The man only smiled. "One payment isn't enough. The road demands more." Erin screamed, clutching my arm as I stared at the man, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I threw the car into reverse, hoping to back away, but the road behind us was gone. Trees stood where it had been moments ago, their skeletal branches twisting together like prison bars. "There's no way out," the man said calmly, his voice cutting through the rising hysteria. "The road requires its toll." "No!" Erin shrieked. "We're not doing this again! You're insane!" She opened her door, stumbling out onto the road. "We'll walk if we have to." But before I could stop her, the man moved, swift as a shadow, inhumanly fast. One moment he stood by the shack, and the next he was in front of her, his bony fingers wrapping around her wrist. "You cannot leave," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "The road does not forgive those who defy it." Erin screamed, thrashing against his grip, but it was useless. I bolted out of the car, adrenaline overriding my fear. "Let her go!" I shouted, grabbing a tire iron from the back seat. The man turned to me, his black eyes narrowing. "You have a choice," he said. "Another memory, or she stays." My heart pounded. "What the hell are you?" "I am the keeper," he said simply. "The tollkeeper of this road, and you are travelers who must pay to pass." "Fine," I spat. "Take another memory. Just let her go." "No," Erin sobbed. "Don't do it. We'll find another way." But I couldn't lose her. Whatever the cost, I couldn't let her be taken by this thing. The tollkeeper released her wrist, stepping toward me with that same predatory grace. "You understand the price now," he said, his skeletal hand reaching for my temple. This time, the pain was sharper, like shards of ice stabbing into my skull. My vision blurred as the memory of my high school graduation, the pride on my parents' faces, the cheers of my friends, was ripped away. When it was over, I staggered, clutching the side of the car for support. Erin rushed to me, tears streaming down her face. "It's done!" I gasped, my voice shaking. "We can go now!" The tollkeeper said nothing, only stepping back into the shadows of his shack. The lantern above him flickered, casting grotesque shapes against the wooden walls. I got back into the car, Erin following reluctantly. The engine roared to life again, and I pressed the gas pedal, desperate to escape. For a brief moment, Hope flared in my chest as the road seemed to change. The trees thinned, and the air felt lighter. But then, the car jolted as if we'd hit something, and the engine sputtered again. "No," I whispered. The shack was there, impossibly in front of us once more. "No!" Erin screamed, slamming her fists against the dashboard. "We did what you wanted! We paid!" The tollkeeper stepped out, his elongated shadow stretching across the road like a crack in reality. "The road's hunger cannot be sated," he said. "Not so easily." I lost it then. I threw open the car door and stormed toward him. "You said we could pass. You lied." He tilted his head, his hat casting his face into deeper shadow. "The road is alive. I am merely its servant." "Then tell it to let us go," I shouted. "Take whatever it wants. Just let us go." The tollkeeper's silence was deafening. Then, for the first time, he pointed toward Erin. "No," I said immediately, stepping in front of her. "The road requires a soul," he said, his voice as calm as ever. Erin clung to me, shaking her head violently. "Please, no, don't let him take me." Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to the tollkeeper. "Take me instead," I said. "Take my soul. Let her go." The tollkeeper seemed to consider this, his head tilting ever so slightly. "The road accepts." I felt a cold, unnatural force grip me, pulling me forward. Erin screamed my name, trying to hold on to me, but it was no use. The tollkeeper's touch was ice and fire all at once, and I felt my very essence being drained away. As the world faded to black, I heard Erin's voice, distant and echoing. "I'll never forget you!" The tollkeeper's voice followed, low and final. "But he will forget himself." When I woke up, I was sitting in the car, the engine idling. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the trees a blur of blackened limbs. Erin was gone. Her name was a faint whisper in my mind, like a word on the tip of my tongue. I couldn't remember her face, her voice, only that she had been there, and now she wasn't. The tollkeeper's shack appeared in the distance, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I was trapped. The road demanded its toll, and I would pay it, over and over, forever. Time lost its meaning on the road. Days, nights, they blurred into one another like streaks of rain on a windshield. My mind was a hollow shell, fragments of memories slipping through my fingers like sand. I knew only two things: the endless stretch of the road ahead, and the tollkeeper's shack, which appeared again and again, defying all logic and sanity. The first time I saw the shack after Erin was taken, or after I gave myself to the road, I swerved off the road, desperate to escape it. The car slammed into a tree, the airbags deploying with a deafening pop. When I crawled out, shaken and bleeding, the shack was right there, the lantern flickering, the tollkeeper standing motionless in its glow. "The road never ends," he said simply. I got back into the car, driving until my eyes ached and my mind buzzed with exhaustion. But no matter how far I went, the shack always returned, its cursed presence inescapable. One day, or maybe it was night, I decided to stop running. My tank was nearly empty, and I was sick of the futility. When the shack appeared again, I parked the car and got out. The tollkeeper stood on the porch, his skeletal figure silhouetted against the lantern's flickering light. He didn't speak, didn't move as I approached. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice hoarse and shaking. "What more could you possibly want?" He tilted his head, the brim of his hat casting shadows over his empty eyes. "The road has chosen you," he said. "You are its servant now." "Servant?" I spat. "I didn't agree to this." "You chose to stay," he said. "You could have let her go. But you didn't. Now you belong to the road." His words stung like needles. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what I had lost. Erin. Her name whispered in the corners of my memory, taunting me with the absence of her face, her voice. "How do I end this?" I demanded. "How do I leave?" He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing me whole. "The road ends when you find its heart. But be warned, the heart of the road demands its greatest toll." I drove for what felt like weeks, the Tollkeeper's cryptic words echoing in my mind. The road twisted and turned, the trees becoming darker, denser, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. Strange things began to happen. Shadows flitted in the corners of my vision, whispers seeped through the cracks in the windows, and sometimes I saw Erin, or what I thought was her, standing in the road, her silhouette beckoning me forward. One night, the whispers turned to screams. My headlights illuminated a figure in the distance, crouched on all fours in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. The figure didn't move. It was emaciated, its skin stretched tight over its bones, its head tilting unnaturally as it stared at me with empty sockets. "Turn back," it rasped, its voice like rusted metal. "The heart will take everything." But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The shack appeared again, but this time, it was different. The lantern burned brighter, casting an eerie red glow across the road. The Tollkeeper stood on the porch, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were others, figures shrouded in shadow, their faces obscured, but their presence oppressive. "The heart is near," the Tollkeeper said as I stepped out of the car. "But you must face the final toll." "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to the figures behind him. They stepped forward, their forms flickering like static, and I realized with horror that they were familiar. One was Erin. The others, I didn't know them, but something told me they were like me. Travelers who had become servants of the road, their souls fractured and bound to its endless stretch. "Do you remember her?" the Tollkeeper asked, his voice low and probing. I think so," I said, the words catching in my throat. "Then claim her," he said. "Take her from the road, and the heart will be revealed." I hesitated. Erin's figure stood motionless, her head bowed, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. "Then you will remain," the Tollkeeper said, "forever." I stepped closer to Erin, my heart aching with the weight of recognition. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but there was something familiar in the way she stood, the way her shoulders slumped as if carrying an unbearable burden. "Erin," I whispered. "It's me." She didn't respond. I reached out, my hand trembling, and as my fingers brushed her shoulder, a searing pain shot through me. Memories flooded back, her laughter, her tears, the way she had clung to me that night on the road. "I'm so sorry," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment I saw the Erin I had known, the Erin I had loved. "The road isn't done with you," she said, her voice a whisper that cut through the silence like a knife. The Tollkeeper's laughter echoed around us, and the figures behind him began to dissolve, their forms fading into the crimson glow of the lantern. I turned to face him, my resolve hardening. "What now?" "The heart awaits," he said. I walked back to the car, Erin's figure disappearing into the shadows. As I drove forward, the road began to change, its surface cracking and splitting, revealing a chasm of fiery light below. And in the distance, I saw it. The heart of the road, pulsating with an unnatural energy. Its surface alive with the faces of those it had claimed. The Tollkeeper's voice echoed in my mind. The heart demands its toll. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. The road wasn't done with me yet. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to bloody subscribe, or the dream demons might pay you a visit. Sleep tight.